Hey, good Monday, everybody. Hopefully, we're having a wonderful start to the week out there. And we do have some things to talk about in today's video, specifically with the tropics, where things have not really calmed down. In fact, they've kind of picked up since Helene, especially out into the main development region of the Atlantic, where we have the potential for multiple powerful hurricanes that could develop here over the next week or two. There's also an area in the Gulf of Mexico that we're monitoring, and we're going to talk about all that in today's video. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Gerald. I'm a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Going to give you an update here again on everything. So if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that. Hit that bell for the latest notifications. Like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and consider sharing the video with somebody that you think might find it useful here. Again, the big goal is to get the word out on any potential impactful weather. I think with all that said, we can go ahead and really just start right, by diving into things here today, because I do want to go ahead and try to get through this as quickly as possible, just so you're not stuck here using your entire day. So let's go ahead and dive into things. Now, taking a look at the Atlantic, and this is a different map than I normally show. Unfortunately, we're having some communications issues with the satellite here, so only some websites are working. But this is directly from NOAA, and this is just as good as any other satellite, just not quite maybe as big of a picture as I would prefer, because we are missing a couple things, one of which is a hurricane up into portions of the North Atlantic, Hurricane Isaac, and that one, luckily, it's kind of moving on out of here and not really going to be a problem. In fact, probably going to dissipate up near the British Isles. So again, not really bringing any concern to anybody. We also have Tropical Storm Joyce here on the middle of your screen. And this one, or actually I think it's Tropical Depression Joyce now, excuse me, is on its way out of here, about to dissipate. Or luckily for us, unfortunately for Joyce, kind of ran into a lot of dry air and shear and just kind of got really messed up by that. So good news for us. Those two storms we don't need to worry about. But behind it, we have a couple other areas. You'll notice here is our new Tropical Depression 12, very likely to become Tropical Storm Kirk at really any time today. And this could become a powerful hurricane over portions of the Atlantic, and behind it, another area to watch. That one could potentially become Tropical Storm Leslie, and also potentially powerful Hurricane Leslie within the next 10 days. And unfortunately, that's not all. Another area of storm activity in the Gulf of Mexico that we're going to talk about here, and we're going to dive into. I know a lot of people on edge after Hurricane Helene, and anytime we see a storm developing kind of in the exact same area, unfortunately, it brings up some wounds for a lot of folks. And again, I'm going to go ahead and preface this right now. We are not expecting another Helene by any means. So go ahead and just I'm sure you'll see crazy social media posts saying Helene Part 2 coming or another disaster. This storm will not be Helene. I can almost guarantee you that. But it could develop into a tropical system and maybe even a hurricane that could make landfall in the United States. So we do absolutely still need to watch it, but just don't listen to these people that are telling you folks in Western North Carolina who are already going through it that it's going to happen again. Those are people that are just looking for likes, looking for clicks, and unfortunately just don't really have any morals. So anyway, back to the map here. Looking at the latest NHC track, again, let's go ahead and simplify things. Isaac, not a problem. Joyce, not a problem. Tropical Depression 12 we'll talk about, but in reality, not really going to be a problem. So that leaves two areas that I think we really should monitor for potential land impacts, and both of them haven't even developed yet. So I'm looking at a 40% chance of development over the next 7 days here for our Gulf system, which is actually down a little bit from what we saw this time yesterday, and then an 80% chance of development out here just south of the Cabo Verde Islands. That one, I'm watching for potential land impacts, but if it happens, we're talking more than 10 days out, folks. So we got plenty of time to monitor that as well, and not something that I, again, would be overly worried about, just something kind of to watch here, and that's where we're at here overall with kind of what we're seeing from the NHC. All right, so again, let's go ahead and quickly talk about the things that do not really matter. This is Tropical Storm Isaac, any minute about to become Post-Tropical Storm Isaac, and even if you happen to be watching up into the British Isles, this is going to stay well offshore from you folks. So there we go. Isaac, not a problem. Tropical Depression Joyce. Not a problem. You'll notice again, looking at the cone here, it's kind of a cone inside of the cone, but it's going to dissipate and not really be anything to talk about. Just really forecast to become a remnant low that even a ship could go through. It won't be that big of a deal. So good news there. All right. Now this is where things get a little bit more, interesting maybe is the word to use. But we do have, again, Tropical Depression 12, and this is going to become, I'll just tell you right now, very likely Major Hurricane Kirk over the next week. And just look at this thing on satellite. It already has that shrimp look to it. Here's the center. Here's the tail of the shrimp. Again, I always love using this this method here, the shrimp test. If it passes the shrimp test, generally speaking, that's a strengthening system in the earlier stages of development. And sure enough, that's exactly what we're seeing here with what is about to become Kirk. And the latest forecast from the NHC is for a major Category 3 hurricane by this coming weekend. And I think that's almost a set in stone forecast. Just go ahead and assume that's going to happen, because I think, again, very likely here to occur with Kirk. Now, behind that, again, we do have this other disturbance with an 80% chance of development, and you'll notice, looking at the cloud cover here, it's taking up a good bit of ocean here in a relatively healthy-looking wave. So something that we're absolutely going to want to watch for potential development on down the road. And, again, nothing to be concerned about, but just something we need to watch. All right, let's look at some model guidance here. Latest GFS, I'll go ahead and circle everything. This is Depression Joyce. This is about to be Kirk. And this is a disturbance with 80% chance of development. So, again, kind of keep track on those. This one, not a problem. But let's go ahead and look at the other two as we move this ahead. And you'll notice Kirk quickly becomes a hurricane, eventually a major hurricane by the middle to end of this week. And then behind it, we get what could potentially be Tropical Storm Leslie here developing south of the Cabo Verde Islands. We've got two big storms out here into the Atlantic. Now, Kirk is a big-time storm, very big pressure-wise and very big size-wise. So just a powerful hurricane. But luckily, as I move this ahead, you'll notice not a problem to anybody. Just scoots on out of here, gets up into the North Atlantic, and eventually runs into cold water and becomes a remnant low, as we so often see with these storms. Now, one thing I will mention with Kirk here is we will have some rough seas out here near the Lesser Antilles, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, even the Bahamas, just due to the size of the system. It's going to send some waves out and maybe even have a rip current risk out that way, but no direct impacts by any means. Now, I move this ahead in time, and what would be Leslie, the storm behind it, you're noticing, all right, well, that one's not a problem either. Yes and no. Again, if we see impacts from that, it'll be more than 10 days out, and you're probably wondering, well, what impacts are you talking about? This thing is way out into the Atlantic. Well, let's take a look at the European model. Again, we like to don't go all in on one model all the time. And here's the European. There is Kirk, again, becoming a major hurricane. And behind it, Leslie delayed a little bit. But because of that delay in development, the storm actually goes a little bit further west here and then becomes a more powerful hurricane further on down the road. You'll notice pressure getting down into the 980s, the 970s, the 960s. And look at this, a 931 millibar major hurricane, probably category 4 or 5 here 10 days from now. Relatively speaking, not that far from the Antilles and moving generally, at least in a direction that would skirt the islands or at least bring maybe some sort of impact. So something we need to watch. Not all the models are on board with this, but we'll take a look at some ensembles. But first off, again, just to remind you, Kirk, not going to be a problem. Here are the latest ensembles. You'll notice, again, a very powerful hurricane, likely, probably category 3, 4. Don't even rule out a 5 with this one, but well out to sea, no direct impacts. Now let's take a look at some ensembles, and I know what you're seeing is a bit of a mess here, but let me kind of draw some things for you. So what you're seeing here in this kind of envelope I've drawn, actually let me pick a different color so you can see it a little bit better. This envelope I've drawn, this is the projected path with the European ensembles for Kirk, and you'll notice again out to sea, but notice this cluster to the south. It would be Leslie, and again, getting 10 days from now, we do have some of these members that bring a storm, even potentially a strong one here near the Antilles. So I want you folks in the Caribbean to watch this one. Again, not something to freak out about or panic about by any means. And again, the GFS completely brings us out to sea. Sorry, I just smacked the microphone. You can see that on the GFS. None of these members get anywhere close to land. But again, I want you to be careful just because we have yet to have kind of a big main development region storm this year impact land. Besides, not even Beryl. I think Beryl's formed in the Caribbean, if I remember correctly, or at least was only a tropical storm in the Antilles. So either way, just watch this one. Plenty of time, more than 10 days, or about 10 days probably, until any impacts would be felt. But something that we do want to monitor here on down the road, as we would want to with anything that could potentially bring impacts. All right, let's talk about some more potential concern here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. A storm system that is going to try to form basically the exact same place Helene did, but the overall atmospheric conditions are quite different this time. Not nearly as favorable, and the steering conditions are going to be different. But let's take a look at some models here. This is 850 millibar vorticity, so basically spin about 1.5 kilometers above the surface, or about a mile or so above our heads, and you'll notice by the time we get to the middle of this week, we do have some spin down here into the Caribbean, getting kind of embedded in this Central American gyre. Again, very similar to how Helene formed on the GFS here. And you'll notice that spin pulls north towards the Gulf of Mexico, but isn't a very strong spin. It's kind of struggling to get its act together. And we get this further ahead into time. What happens with the spin is it doesn't even form in the Caribbean, but then kind of merges with another area of vortmax or just enhanced vorticity here into the Gulf of Mexico, and you just get this big, broad area of spin on the GFS. It kind of fights between itself and then eventually tries to form into a more defined area of rotation and tries to work it up into the central Gulf Coast and kind of just hangs out there for a little while in the 7 to 10 day range before way out into time gets kicked out back into the Atlantic. So nothing super strong showing up on the models, and that's why I think the NHC brought chances down 10%. I don't think necessarily that there's a lower chance of this developing than yesterday. I'd say it's about the same, but I think it might be delayed in that development. And you can see the same thing on the European model. Again, we've got that spin in the Caribbean. We've got a little bit of spin in the Bay of Campeche. What happens is they kind of interact a little bit here through this week, become one big broad area of spin. And by this coming weekend, again, we do have some vorticity showing up here in the Gulf of Mexico. It's just not very strong. It's not very tight vorticity. There's not a big vort gradient, but it does try to develop into something. And again, about 7 to 10 days getting into next week. This is basically 7 days from right now. The European does bring some sort of maybe an open wave or a tropical storm into the central Gulf Coast of Florida and then works it back out into the Atlantic. So something we're going to want to watch, and I'll show you the Canadian as well just to give you one more model. Again, kind of breezing through this exact same idea. This vorticity gets caught up into the Gulf, kind of two areas of vorticity that merge together, which the models have come into better agreement on, so that's good. And then again, kind of just struggles, but eventually maybe tries to work towards the west coast of Florida. But watch what happens on the Canadian. I'll stop this right here. This is a week from right now, next Monday. You'll notice it tries to get its act together, but also look at how elongated this vorticity contour is. It's quite strong, or excuse me, quite long and elongated. And what happens is that down here on the southern end, a piece of it kind of breaks off as you get whenever you get this stretching of vorticity. And then we almost get a storm to try to form about 10 days from now, instead just north of the Yucatan. So what I'll say is there's a lot of energy flying around the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of it that's going to try to probably compete with each other and might struggle to get a defined vorticity. I keep hitting the microphone, sorry. A defined vorticity maximum. And until that happens, we're not going to see a strong storm by any means in the Gulf of Mexico, but it's a pattern that we'll need to watch probably for the extended range, maybe even more than 10 days, as the models try to figure out where vorticity finally forms, and does it stretch and kind of break off, and what are the conditions where it breaks off. So really just kind of a mess to forecast right now. So anyone who's telling you a major hurricane is coming to Florida or the Gulf Coast, just don't listen to them, because if they're saying that, they're probably really just guessing and not using meteorology at all. So I will mention, though, again, I do think a tropical storm, maybe even a low-end hurricane, is possible in the Gulf of Mexico within the next 10 days. But it's a tough forecast right now. So we'll continue to keep you updated. Nothing to panic about right now, but keep an eye on it for sure. And here's one of the reasons to keep an eye on it. Atmospheric conditions here are relatively favorable. Excuse me. Getting choked up over here. Here's that area of vorticity down into the Caribbean. Watch how this pulls north again into the Gulf of Mexico through this week, getting into a pretty moist environment here with the potential of tropical development. And you'll notice tries to spin up on the GFS with that moisture. And again, we get kind of this weak, sloppy tropical storm that eventually works into the Gulf Coast about 7-8 days from now. But a lot of dry air hanging around there, and kind of rips it apart apart pretty quickly, but could bring rain to places that necessarily don't need it through Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, maybe the apps. But again, this will be 10 days from now. And by that point, the rivers, creeks, and streams would have already flowed well back downstream. Again, the one kind of saving grace for the mountains, unfortunately, obviously what happened with Helene is just heartbreaking. But compared to areas down near the coast where it takes a lot longer for water to kind of spill out into the Atlantic in those swampy areas in the mountains, I mean, it hits the top of the mountain and it is down the mountain quick, which unfortunately leads to those debris flows that we saw, and just the unfortunately, again, Chimney Rock. I mean, it really breaks my heart to see the videos out of that area, and now what Lake Lure looks like with just all that debris. Again, it's just heartbreaking, but the one saving grace is the rivers, creeks, and streams kind of recover pretty quickly and go back down to their original levels. Wind shear wise, again, we are going to see some divergence aloft here in the Caribbean, and this is why this will be a key. Now, if the storm can somehow manage to form much quicker into the Caribbean right now, it'll have a much higher chance of becoming a problem on down the road. And again, there's some moisture, there's some divergence aloft here, so don't rule it out, but a lot of the models just struggle to do it. And then again, we see some more favorable wind patterns into the southern Gulf of Mexico this time next week. But notice we do have a dip in the jet stream, and just winds are absolutely ripping over the southeast here about a week from now. So that will bring some wind shear. That'll also bring potentially some strong steering currents back to the west. And because of that, we'll see the steering map here. One of the reasons I don't think this is going to be another big problem for the southeast is kind of what we're seeing now through the next week. We've got this big ridge, which basically, consider this as just like a linebacker in football. You've got a receiver here, which is the storm. It wants to go up, but this linebacker is going to block it. It's not going to let it any further north, and I don't know why this is the analogy I'm using. It just came to my brain. But that's kind of what this big high pressure is doing. So again, you got to prevent this from pulling a Helene where it just pulls right up through the Gulf and then rides right through the Appalachians. We're also not going to see a pre-event with this. Again, this big area of high pressure is going to help to keep things relatively dry over the southeast. And the only rain that we would see would potentially be from the event. So again, the mountains had a precursor event plus Helene. That's what caused that disaster. A very different setup here. And even when we look at the ensembles, obviously the first thing I'll note is what a mess on the ensembles. Again, it's a forecasting nightmare right now, models all over the place. But I will note, you'll see the members here that develop this quicker do get it stronger into the Gulf and then curve it back towards the west central coast of Florida. The weaker members get this up into the western Gulf, kind of meander it a little bit, struggle to do anything with it, and then kind of push it eastbound towards the west coast of Florida, which I think is a pretty common theme. But you'll notice not a single member brings us over the mountains of North Carolina. The furthest north we see these members go is South Georgia, low country is South Carolina. So again, you folks in North Carolina, keep an eye on it for sure. But I don't want you stressing out and having sore memories brought up over the next week. Really, you just need to focus on your recovery process, and really the whole country needs to focus on getting help out there, because this is quite honestly the Katrina of the mountains of North Carolina, and just something that we've never seen before in any of our lifetimes. So that should be a big priority for everybody. All right, European ensembles, again, a weak storm, but you do get the general idea. This gets into the Gulf, kind of meanders, does some loops, and then hooks back towards the west coast of Florida. So I think right now, if I had to make a forecast, and again, this is not something I'm confident in, but if you put me on the spot and said, Gerald, what do you think? Well, I think we probably get a tropical storm that forms somewhere here into the Gulf of Mexico over the next 7 to 10 days, and then probably meanders and goes somewhere in the general direction of Florida, South Georgia, South Alabama, low country of South Carolina, I think, would be my forecast right now. But again, model's still all over the place, so we'll just have to wait and see, to be completely honest. All right, current conditions. Obviously, what's happening in the Gulf is not the only thing that matters to folks out there. So I'm going to pause this because I'm tired of the flashing map, and you can still kind of see what happens without it. So we do have some showers and storms still over the mid-Atlantic and southern northeast. This is that leftover remnant low from Helene and that upper level low. Today will probably be the last day it impacts our weather in a big way. Probably expecting more storms this afternoon, much like yesterday. And by the way, boy, oh boy, Southwest Virginia, we had tornado warning after tornado warning. I mentioned in my video yesterday, I said I was surprised the Storm Prediction Center didn't have a risk up. I also said I wasn't expecting a tornado outbreak, in all fairness. And granted, I don't think really many of those touched down. We might have had maybe one or two. So again, though, I was surprised that SPC didn't have a risk yesterday, and I'm kind of surprised they don't again today because it's a similar setup. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, the other thing to note on this map, a big-time trough back up towards the western portions of Canada. This is going to kind of sneak on through the northern tier of the country here, and you'll notice we're already getting some shower and storm activity out of that. But other than that, I mean, we're really in a bit of a lull for active weather in the country. Taking a look at radar, again, out west, really nothing is happening, so we'll zoom into the east here. Some scattered showers this morning up through the Poconos into the DMV area here. West Virginia, northern West Virginia here into portions of southeastern Ohio, getting some showers, even a couple storms sneaking on through the Raleigh area, the Charlotte area, and down through North Carolina, and then some storms down into the Florida area. So a couple folks getting in on active weather, but honestly, we're in a real lull right now, which I know this map you might be wondering, well, it doesn't really look like we're in a lull. A lot of this up into the northern tier of the country is due to that front trying to move on through. We're going to pick up some winds, so red flag warnings are a concern for you folks. Again, don't burn anything if you don't have to. As for the Pacific Northwest here, again, a little bit of cold air with that trough that we're watching. Out west, it's going to be hot, so we do have some excessive heat warnings and heat advisories that we're watching out for. So again, a very colorful map, but a lot of this isn't necessarily a super big deal. We had some fog this morning down towards Mississippi, Alabama, and the Memphis area. Now, what I will mention here is a flooding threat through portions of central Virginia up through southeastern West Virginia. Like I mentioned, we're still dealing with some rainfall here due to this upper level low that kind of is just taking a sweet old time getting out of here. So I would be concerned for that this afternoon. Also, slightly concerned for the potential of maybe a couple severe storms similar to yesterday. It's quite honestly a very similar setup. So why they aren't pulling the trigger, I don't know, but they're the experts. So all I can do is give you my forecast and say I would personally put a marginal risk up today, and here's where I would put it for. You see this afternoon, you folks in Virginia, North Carolina, West Virginia, if I'm making a forecast, and I'm going to because I have every right to, right in here, I'm putting a GMWeather marginal risk for severe weather, okay? So again, from South Carolina up through North Carolina, Virginia, up through West Virginia, again, I'm not expecting a big severe weather outbreak by any means, but a couple of these storms could try to spin, a little bit of hail, a little bit of a strong wind, and again, an isolated tornado threat. I would just watch for that today. Again, not a big deal, but something that I want you to be aware of in case you haven't heard of it from somebody else. And again, you'll notice these storms firing up this afternoon here, bringing some rain. That's why we have that flooding risk out through eastern North Carolina. Could get some pretty heavy rain through Raleigh, Rocky Mount. By the way, Rocky Mount hit by a big tornado too out of Helene. So keeping those folks in our thoughts and prayers. And then luckily overnight tonight, this kind of dwindles. It tries to get out of here, and we get into Tuesday afternoon. And the upper level low kind of stops influencing our weather, but unfortunately, we got this trough again now dipping through, and we've got a line of showers. And in fact, let me back this up a little bit for you folks in the Midwest. Again, not a whole lot of rain, maybe a couple showers today through the Dakotas, Minnesota, the UP of Michigan, Wisconsin. But tomorrow afternoon is really when this picks up in coverage. And again, maybe a small risk for some severe storms tomorrow. I think if anything, just some gusty winds and hail here through Michigan. But noticing some popcorn showers to the south of there, as we may have just enough lift and heating in the afternoon that that trough can just pop up a couple brief showers or storms through Kentucky, Tennessee, the Western Carolinas, Virginia, and West Virginia. And again, you'll notice that tries to even scoot on down with a little bit of a line of showers. And then that gets us here through our overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, and noticing again this trough still working on through, bringing some showers with it. And even some, lighter showers and more isolated further to the south through the mid-Atlantic and southeast. Let me go ahead and change this to the NAM model just so we can get this all the way out into time. Because I don't want to stop right there with the forecast. We'll move this ahead. Again, we get through overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, scattered showers into Wednesday afternoon. I think scattered showers through the northeast is a possibility. But then at that point, this high pressure works on in, and nicer conditions, I think, really take over for much of the week ahead, which will be good because we'll need it and we will want to see that. Now, our 500 millibar height anomaly map here from the GFS, again, does a pretty good job at showing kind of the concern here. We've got this leftover upper level low still closed off, although much weaker here over the mid-Atlantic. That's going to bring those afternoon showers today. But look at this big pocket of cold air up into Canada. Again, a sign of changing seasons here. And this, again, just clips the northern tier of the country. So that's why we're getting a little bit of rain and some cooler air. But after that, we kind of turn to zonal flow through the middle of the week here. And what I mean by that is these isobars are just parallel to each other, kind of this geostrophic flow, if you will, over much of the country. And it's it's kind of just something that's going to bring relatively mild, normal weather. I mean, it's not gonna be super cold. It's not going to be super warm. And hopefully it'll keep precipitation chances down. I think it will, with lacking of any sort of divergence, really. Although a couple afternoon pop-up showers and that sort of setup is a possibility, but it kind of builds into a stronger ridge here before another, little trough, tries to sneak on through the northern tier of the country here later this week into the weekend, and then really dives into the northeast, and that could bring much cooler air by next weekend. But then a big ridge building out west that tries to sneak on through, and then we'll kind of see what happens after that. But overall speaking, if we'll take a look at the weather, again, a couple of active places early in the week like we talked about. After that, though, things remain relatively calm. You're noticing a little bit of blue showing up in the southeast here by this coming week, and that's that Gulf disturbance. We'll have to see what happens with it. You're also noticing a little bit of, I said blue, I meant to say green, sorry. A little bit of green showing up here also into portions of Michigan, Indiana. Again, another trough going to try to sneak on through later in the week. That could bring some shower activity and some cooler air behind it. But all things considered, through the next 10 days, outside of whatever happens in the Gulf of Mexico that we're watching, nothing too crazy ongoing in the weather, which is a good thing, and we will take it. Temperature anomaly here, again, a tad chilly, or not chilly, but cooler than average temperatures into the mid-Atlantic due to that upper level low. After that, again, a little bit of more blue. I can't really talk today, sorry. A little bit of more blue. That's not English. A little bit more blue or below average temperatures. Try to sneak on in with that trough through the Midwest and then into the Northeast. After that, though, we warm up again before potentially another trough sneaks on through. And here we go. This coming weekend, noticing a lot more blue showing up on the map here. Again, I think that weekend trough will have a higher chance of cooling things down through, again, about 7 days or so out from now. And then after that, we will see what happens. I will mention, I'll go way out here. The GFS has been hinting towards the middle of the month at a pattern change to cooler temperatures through the east. We'll see if that happens. Don't get your hopes up, but I'll keep you updated. Alrighty, folks. Again, I appreciate you watching. Appreciate you tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video. Comment. Let me know where you're watching from. And have a wonderful rest of your Monday. And I'll see you all next time.